In the UK, the spectacle of Elon Musk attacking the Premier, his ministers, and policies, plus a bond sell-off potentially forcing Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves into unpopular spending cuts, are shaping a convenient narrative for the opposition to go after Starmer's government. Musk is now waging another battle in his daily online campaign against centrist European leaders. Who wins this war between social media giants and the state? Hello and welcome to another episode of Global Business Insights, where we look at lessons from some of the topical themes. But first, the business headlines. ArcelorMittal South Africa, that's AMSA, the largest steel maker in South Africa, last week announced a closure of a major part of its operations as it faced tough business conditions and cheap imports. ArcelorMittal announced this closure, implying 1 million tons of annual long steel production will cease. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States has extended the deadline for Nippon Steel Corporation to abandon its $14.1 billion takeover of United States Steel Corporation. The deadline will be extended to June 18 from February the 2nd originally. And Meta's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, met with US President-elect Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago on Friday, also announcing in a memo to its employees that it was ending its diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, including those for hiring, training, and picking suppliers. Amazon, Walmart, and McDonald's have also made similar decisions regarding diversity efforts. The lawyer for TikTok and its Chinese parent company ByteDance argued in the Supreme Court that if Congress could force the sale of the short video app or ban it in the United States, it could also come after other companies. The law sets a January 19 deadline for ByteDance to sell the popular social media platform or face a ban on national security grounds. Zambia's Securities and Exchange Commission has sanctioned Standard Chartered for mis-selling Chinese property companies' bonds to local wealth clients at the height of China's real estate crisis. The UK-headquartered bank, also looking to sell its wealth and retail banking businesses in Zambia, was facing enforcement action for two breaches of SEC rules following a months-long investigation. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says the fund sees steady global growth and continuing disinflation when it releases an updated World Economic Outlook on the 17th of January. She also said the US economy was doing quite a bit better than expected, adding that there was uncertainty around the trade policies of the administration of President-elect Donald Trump. That was also adding to headwinds facing the global economy and driving long-term interest rates higher. China exports soared 10.7% year on year, and the trade surplus hits a record in December as factories pushed up inventories ahead of trade risks under a Trump presidency. This was also as stimulus measures appear to be supporting demand in the industrial sector. The war between private and public sector has played out in the past, whether with the steel barons or giant banks. The likes of Andrew Carnegie or JP Morgan were once tamed by antitrust regulation and the state. This time last year, one of the major change themes was the advent of rising regulation after big technology and its social media partners. Social media companies and the private sector were also urged to be more socially responsible, to imbibe and spread green policies and diversity, equity, and inclusion. The tone of the private sector and social media was defensive as their CEOs were lectured before congressional hearings, and the Musk acquisition of Twitter was derided as a disaster waiting to happen. It should not be a surprise that social media giants, tired of playing defense, plotted a more proactive response. Their opportunity came in the US elections. David Allen Green, in a recent article in the Financial Times, writes that the first problem with regulating social media platform comes from technology complexity. The second is that to impose effective regulation against unwilling platforms requires determined, unflinching government action and political will. But also, the state has an agenda. The power of the state is derived from influencing citizens to confer a ruling mandate through their votes. Social media has tampered with that dynamic with potential consequences as the power to influence of the state is severely eroded and increasingly so. There is an acute discontent of citizens seeking alternatives in a difficult economic context. We also see an increasing fascination with technology and the power of algorithms to satisfy previously underserved audiences that were hitherto feeling excluded. Third is explosion in popularity of media sites among the younger demographic rebelling against the familiar status quo themes. As state regulators struggled to figure out how to manage a flood of misinformation and unrestrained speech, we also see a convergence of capital, private sector, innovation, and technology strengthening the social media business model. And now comes Elon Musk doing the unthinkable, risking all to back Donald Trump at a time when the mainstream strongly favored a Kamala win. To say Musk gained a new edge with the Republican victory is an understatement. Mark Zuckerberg joined the bandwagon, announcing it will end its third-party fact checking. This was an admission that this was not really working and not working out as fair policing was either too expensive or just plainly impractical. Social media giants were under siege and in a position of weakness, with the state regulatory hammer posing an increasingly existential threat. Social media lost battles in Brazil, China, India, and Europe. Meta brought on former UK Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg as Vice President of Global Affairs to help in influencing formulation and implementation of EU policy, later replaced by a Republican political chieftain. So who wins this fresh battle as Musk goes after states? The state does not want to be seen as defeating free speech, but social media knows they cannot have victory in a battle with foreign governments simply because those who control the laws always prevail over the corporations that must follow it. The state over time, either directly or indirectly, will tame and control any corporate organization in their jurisdiction. Eventually, it is the state that wins, but not after policy and regulation may have been repurposed to deliver a more constructive balance, recognizing that the power of social media comes from its audience and the erosion of state power is irreversible. Also, one cannot rule out, albeit unlikely, more draconian regulatory measures to put the social media dragon in its proper place. The collapse of ArcelorMittal AMSA, South Africa's largest steelmaker, is yet another symptom of more significant problems, including unreliable and expensive electricity generation, poor logistics, especially freight, and policy uncertainty in Africa's most developed economy. In the medium term, about 100,000 jobs possibly could be at risk as South African imports more goods from China instead of domestically producing them. Also, last week, in a recent speech, the president, that's President Ramaphosa, warned that minerals must be processed locally and finished products exported. SA faces high poverty, though it's one of the world's largest producers of platinum group metals, manganese, chromium, gold, vanadium, and other critical minerals. By 2030, Africans will make up over 80% of the world's poor if something is not urgently done. In a different world, fighting a global economic battle with productivity to penetrate markets, Africa is undergoing more of social transformation without the needed economic transformation. On January 4, US President Joe Biden blocked the purchase of US steel by Japan's Nippon Steel due to security concerns and the possible detrimental effect on US manufacturing. Protectionism definitely has its place, but it comes at a cost and is not the answer to an unattractive regulatory environment, and an environment which does not enable the thriving of local industries. Neither is rebasing GDP and inflation computation in Nigeria an answer to the core problem of low productivity, even though it's the right thing to do. Indeed, protected state companies end up running so inefficiently, and government cannot perpetually keep using taxpayers' funds to patch up the issues. Africa needs to do two things well. First is to attract foreign capital. Africa accounts for 3% of the world's GDP, but attracts less than 1% of its private capital. That has to change as it embraces business-friendly policies, growth, and free and more competitive markets. The second is to add more value locally, unleashing the potential, talents, and strength in a growing but still unskilled younger population. More than half of the young people entering the workforce will be African. I see three important dimensions of the opportunity for Africa to emerge as an important economic bloc within the medium term. First, Africa must pursue aggressive economic growth. One can't repeat this, knowing that fast growth is the best path to cutting poverty. It means embracing small business, medium-sized outfits, and mega businesses with an eye to dramatically increasing the economic pie. A friendly attitude towards entrepreneurs and those who take huge risks, and incubation of more risk-taking tycoons and billionaires must be complemented with the right regulations that foster and do not stifle growth. Let's keep our Dangotes and Elon Musks in Africa and aim to have much more of them. Second, privatization is one of the faster paths to unleashing both productivity enhancement and attracting local and foreign capital. Privatization must be linked to capital inflows and guaranteed local value add. For example, the choice of a buyer for, say, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited should factor commitment to infuse massive fresh capital and leading-edge technologies to train local hands and develop downstream and the petrochemical industry. The media is awash with news of a revived NNPCL as huge opaque funding, which should fund other social priorities, sunk into efforts to do what private capital was set up to do so much better. Pursuing a local content journey which drains the economy of the needed capital to expand is also very suboptimal. Finally, is the urgent need to integrate African markets to get larger economies of scale. That is, having better access to capital and scale that will attract global investors. Africa does not need more help from outside economic blocs that have their hands full in breaking out of their own tepid growth scenarios. The paradigm that chains Africa to remaining a convenient market for easy exploitation of cheap raw inputs must change. Africa needs to wake up and find the leadership within that can spearhead its own economic revolution. US futures were down and Asian stocks closed broadly lower, with the US dollar at a 2-year high following higher US bond yields. This was after a strong US jobs report last week implied easing of US interest rates was less likely. Meanwhile, crude oil prices climbed today to a 4-month high as a fresh wave of American sanctions on Russia threatened supplies. Brent crude in early morning trade up 2% and over $81 a barrel. Well, that's all we have on today's episode of Global Business Insights. Thank you so very much for watching, and please subscribe to follow the channel. This is Bode Oshosami. Bye-bye.